additional. Next.
Good question. This is directed more towards you, Stephen. What kind of advice would you give someone that is in public relations or communications that's interested in maybe leaning towards that level for a job?
I think you already have the skills, right? So the networking part's important. One thing, and you guys can completely disagree with me on this if you want, from a press perspective, when you come from a PR side, the one, I guess, I don't want to use the word fear, but hesitation, is that both the big P and the small p politics is not understood. I learned so much about it by going out on the campaign trail, and that's an option. Working for somebody that is going to be newly elected, and and I realize that that's not an option for everyone to quit their job and go move to Missouri and live on a blow up bed in St. Louis, which I have done, and so I realize that's not an option. But even just figuring out what side you're on, if you live within the District, Maryland, Virginia border, you are no more than 15 miles from one of the biggest battleground states in the country, the state of Virginia. And so you may not be able to pick up and move to Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina, but you can get involved in that space. Volunteer for campaigns. State ledge races have no money, so they can never afford to have a number of dedicated people. But just going in through that vein, and I tell this very funny little story. So in 2004, as I mentioned, I went to work in the great state of Missouri. Someone had asked me I was living in Chicago at the time, and someone had asked me to go, if I could go volunteer on this Senate race in Chicago. And I was like, I really need a job. I need someone to pay me. That senator was Barack Obama. And so I missed a bit of an opportunity, we shall say. But it would have started off as a volunteer job. And if you can do it, I think working on a campaign is good experience because you understand, like you guys were saying, like the constituent issues drive so much. And from a press perspective, you need to understand, because it's a bit of a filter. You have the press, which is a bit of a filter between the direct constituent interaction. So really understanding, who you are working for, what they believe in, making sure that you align, because there's never 100% alignment, I don't think. Like there are days where you're going to say, I really can't believe these words are going to come out of my mouth, but they are. But you have to believe in the person you're working for. And for me, I've worked for more than 10 candidates, members of parliament, members of Congress. And the one thing that they've all had in common is that I believed in them. They were good people. And from a press perspective, that's critically important because you're speaking on their behalf. And so meeting folks like these guys who are doing the hiring, important. There's so many ways to go about doing that. Also gaining the experience from different ways. And also, it doesn't hurt to just apply in the press position. I think it's a little bit different because we have fairly demonstrable skills. Going on the record, doing public affairs, those are things that you can put on a resume, which people will pick up. Or even, if you work in a firm now, trying to merge into the public affairs space where you start interacting on a professional level with the Hill or people that are going to go into an administration or something of that nature. And then understanding the nature of campaigns, and I mean campaigns in Washington, like getting legislation passed, how communications, public relations, public affairs is now really factoring into that, because I don't think, and you guys more recently on the Hill, I have not, in my experience, seen anything recently that was just a strict lobbying campaign. There was a public affairs campaign to it, which involves PR, which involves grassroots organizing, all of that is coming together because it's such a dynamic world, and I think in which communications happen on so many facets, that understanding how it all melds together is just a huge coup when you're trying to move from the corporate public relations side into the political side, because you have to know what these folks are dealing with before you get in the door. I don't know if you guys have anything to add. I know we're foreign creatures to most of everybody. Does that answer your question? Is that helpful? But I do think it's such a boon for people that can't pick up and quit their jobs that we live in or right next to Virginia, because there's so many opportunities.
Yeah, I volunteered with the House of Delegates race. It was a primary race this spring. Did a lot of door knocking. But no, it was a great experience. But obviously, I can't quit my day job.
Right.
Yeah, I work public affairs for a federal agency.
Okay.
In Arlington.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was a great experience, but I can't.
Right. Well, I think you're actually already poised to start, to start making the connections and start applying to jobs on the Hill. You obviously have an expertise. I'm not going to make you out yourself and tell me what your expertise is. But if you're already working for a federal agency, you have an expertise in something. And so start looking at committees who works on issues that you already handle. Get to know those people. Follow a lot of, and I'm really starting to sound like a stalker. I read Politico Influence. I read the National Journal People column. Anything that I can find that tells me who's moving where and what's happening. Because if you can be like, oh, I see so-and-so is moving to so-and-so. Oh, I wonder if they've filled that position yet.
Yeah.
And then figure, and this comes back to the networking and the LinkedIn and everything we've talked about. Okay, I see this person's moving. I know so-and-so at this organization. I'm going to contact them and see where they are in the process. For instance, sometimes there's movement in offices where so-and-so is left to go work at this big company in a lobbying firm. Okay, well, that means that there's going to be some kind of movement in the office. It may or may not be in and out of the press secretary job, but it never hurts to put in a call and say, hey, I see this happen. What's happening over there? I think you're already poised to make the move. You just need to do the groundwork of, figuring out where you want to work, what skills, and issues you bring to the table.
I've seen a guy who was in a very similar situation to yours some years ago, who had a position, decided he really wanted to go to work on Capitol Hill as a press secretary at the time, or communications director, and he just wouldn't settle for anything other than that. And he was, like Alex said, really persistent. There were a couple of times when I told him, just give it up, don't do it. And he kept after it, and he ended up getting a great job in a great office. I mean, he's sort of spun out now, and he's in, he's a vice president right now at a significant PR firm now. So there's hope. There's not only hope, I mean, there are lots and lots of examples out there too. I mean, one of the nice things about sort of watching this process from my perspective is that, I can watch people go through this process, and now Ryan's seeing this too because he's teaching, come into the process sort of scrub-faced young kids, 23 years old or whatever, or maybe a little bit older, go through the process, and you think, maybe they'll be okay, maybe they won't. And 6 or 7 years later, they're a chief of staff, they're a vice president at a major lobbying firm or here in town. It's really, it's heartening to watch on the one hand, but it also says something about, the value of the persistence and, the desire to make yourself a more effective operative here in Washington. So, other questions? Yeah.
I worked in state legislatures and campaigns in Texas, which is obviously deep red, and I'm a Democrat, so does that, people I work for, I thought, like you said, were good men, but does that pigeonhole me if I want to make the jump to Capitol Hill of just working for the Republicans?
No.
No.
The only thing in the middle of the road in Washington is roadkill.
Yeah. You have to pick a side.
You pick a side, and that's where you're at. Now, there was a time when I first started teaching, people could move from one party to another, but
Once.
Yeah.
Once, yeah, well, you know, there aren't too many other places other than once to move, but you can't do it. And there are lots of people who've been around town for a while now who've seen kind of horror stories where, you know, someone, you know, when they were a sophomore in college, in fact, I can tell you a specific example. A sophomore in college, interned for a moderate Republican, could not get, or actually took a job in a major presidential campaign for a Democrat and got fired after they found out they had worked as an intern in their sophomore year in college for a Republican. It's that partisan.
But I also think, as a Democrat coming out of Texas, if you ask
There's a future there.
yeah, I was going to say, as a Democrat, I believe there's, if you talk to Republicans, they don't believe there's a future in Texas for Democrats, but I think that that's also incredibly useful information. One thing we haven't talked about are the committees, which, you know, the election committees, the DTRIP, the DSCC, NRCC, the NRC, thank you. I was trying to, I was talking about that last night, and I was like, okay, what's the acronym? And they interact, you know, yes, they are campaign focused, but they also interact intensively with the Hill. So you have, in some cases, you have just as much face time with a member of Congress than than their staff, because they're over there doing call time and they're over there for meetings and that sort of thing. So I don't, I know that there aren't a whole lot of Democratic members from the great state of Texas, but you have an expertise. I worked in North Dakota. It's most people consider it fairly red. I would disagree with that, but it does help to understand how to work with, because regardless of what office you're in, you're going to have constituents of both sides.
Right.
And to understand, which I'm sure you understand deeply, how to work with people from very differing political views, looking for a Democrat from a more conservative state, a more electorally focused, because if you come, if you're a Democrat in a red state, you're very focused on your election all the time. And I think that's a good place for you as well.
So are you saying that you worked for Republicans in the state legislature?
Yeah, I worked for Republicans, and like I said, I thought they were both good men, but I'm a moderate Republicans, but I'm a Democrat. But.
So you're going to need to, if you want to work for Democrats, whether they be moderate or not, you're going to need to be able to explain that up front and
Right.
be honest about it so they don't find out later and think
Yeah.
you were hiding it. Because you don't want to appear like you're an operative or something, right? You want to...
I didn't think about that. That's a good point.
I mean, it's really a tough, it's a really unfortunate environment, and I mean, there are a lot of people in town who can, address this and offer anecdotes that are pretty horrific, but, and it's really unfortunate too. I mean, by the way, one of the things we emphasize is we try to make sure that we have an adequate representation in our faculty of both. In fact, I probably got more Republicans on my faculty than just about any political science department in America.
One thing I might suggest for you, I don't know where you're working now, but there are always issues that speak to one side or the other. There's some that cross the line, but there's some that might be a way, because then you're meeting people in an environment where you're not having to, you do have to explain it, but you're meeting people in an environment where it's not very tense to have to explain it, because you're already demonstrating that you're working on something that isn't, kind of the other political stripe, if that makes sense.
Look, you worked for 2 Republicans. You might as well just come on over. Might as well just come over.
Go to the dark side. Over there. Okay, one more question, sir.
We've talked a lot about perseverance and some individual skills to help us that help propel you. One thing I'm curious about is in terms of career setbacks or challenges or hardships on the job, what would you say comes to mind first is the most significant hardship that you faced, and how did you tackle that?
Well, I get to go first.
Yes,
Yeah,
you
he
do.
gets to go first because he just, this is
Yeah,
good
so
too. This is
I worked for a freshman Democrat from a new district. There was no electoral history other than his, and it was a deemed very, he drew it himself actually, a very safe district, and we just went right into a buzzsaw and lost unexpectedly. And I was chief of staff, and I had about 20 staff members, including a newly unemployed congressman who aspired to be Speaker of the House or something.
Yeah.
And I focused on finding everyone jobs, and sort of, I thought about myself, but I was, I've been there a while, I'll figure it out, and I just did everything. I networked everywhere I could to get everyone jobs, and that was how I dealt with it. And everyone except the congressman, he had to figure that out himself. I would take the opportunity to talk about, what I was looking for when that, arose. I did my own networking, but it was a I went on a mission, and that was how I dealt with it. And within 26 days, I had everyone placed, basically, everyone in DC.
That's good. You've not had any setbacks. You've won every election you've been involved in.
No, the setback for me was when my boss died in office.
That's true.
Awful. He passed away in September of 2007, and I was, you then go, when that member dies, you then go from working for, in my case it was Congressman Gilmore, to then working for the 5th District of Ohio. Your office is taken over by the clerk of the House, and to keep your job until the next member is elected, I couldn't get involved in the race, the special election to succeed him. So I was interviewing in downtown and lobbying in trade associations and I think a firm. I thought I was done with the Hill. And then also talking to folks on the Hill too. I was a legislative director at the time, and I was like, I just didn't, and I just bought a house and stuff like that, and I didn't know what the heck I was going to do. And through the network that I had developed, and I happened to know Congressman Latta, who was just elected to succeed him. I knew his campaign manager. I knew his campaign manager wanted to stay in political consulting, didn't want to come to the Hill. And talked with him, and he gave my resume to the congressman, and so one day he took office on December 13th, 2007. December 12th, I had to leave the office as if I were never coming back. So December 13th, I came and sat in an office I had just left the day prior to wait for him to come back to vote, to talk with him about a job, about being his chief of staff. So that was, it was weird, but from great tragedy came great opportunity, and I've now been with him longer than I was with my previous boss. So, and in this, every 2 years, my boss likes to say every 2 years, on election day, he's unemployed. Well, so are all of his entire staff are too. So, I have kids and stuff like that, but I'm pretty comfortable with, if something were to, tragic were to happen, I'd be okay. And I want to make sure, like you did, I want to make sure my staff is taken care of. But, in this business, you also have to be comfortable with, every 2 years or every 6 years, if you're in the Senate, of potentially not having a job.
You go to bed with one and you wake up without one.
Yeah.
And I think that's happened to all of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think mine is probably, so after I graduated from GSPM, I moved to Chicago, and I was looking for a job, and I had a conversation with somebody who was in politics, and just like talking about my skills, and they said, all your experiences in Canada means nothing to me. And by this point in time, he'd been very angry. He'd been not particularly nice. And and I will say this, that it was a Democrat. And I said, oh, wow. So, that experience of working for a party that's been in power 80 of the last 100 years has nothing on, on the Democrats. And he said, and I said, so we hold the White House, Senate, or House? And he said, he goes, well, no. And I said, point made. But it taught me something that was very humbling, to be honest with you. I had to build my career again. And it has been tremendously fun. And asked me the day after that conversation when, I turned down the internship with Mr. Obama and, had to go get a job. It was very, very humbling to do that because I'd worked for a cabinet minister in Canada, which is a big deal. And to come here and have it really mean nothing was humbling. And at first it was a little disheartening. But then just building it back up was so much fun. And the experiences I got to have. And, I spent a very exciting 2 weeks in Iowa in January. Just buy a good coat. Doing field. I'd never done field before. But it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about the process that, I was I'll be honest, a little arrogant. Being like, well, I know what I'm doing. I'd never done field for a presidential campaign before. So I got that new skill, and it takes, this can be a very humbling business. There are people with very big egos, but it can be a very humbling business. And I think for me, it was remembering that, you're only as good as the person you are. And someday, because titles are thrown around a lot in this town. And I think all of us have experienced, they can go away like that. And it can be your fault, or it can have nothing to do with you. And just learning those lessons of trying to be humble. When you're a press secretary, you have to be a little arrogant because you better believe in what you're saying is true because no one else will buy it if you don't. But I think that just remembering that, to be humble and thankful for the opportunity is the biggest lessons I learned from that. And it really just kind of carries me along the way. Can I just ask a question? I'm curious. So we kind of got off the telling us who you are and what you do. But I'm curious if you guys could tell us why you're here. So I'd love to know why you guys are all here. Who you are, where you're from, kind of all that fun stuff. Brooklyn.
Oh, no. Just a nice sweater.
It is a nice sweater.
Well, I'm Kenneth Worrells. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I just moved to D.C. a couple months ago.
Welcome.
Thank you. I came up here to pursue government, political careers, and communication. I do graphic design, social media marketing, and management, things of that nature. And I wanted to get more involved with it on a national standpoint. I'm interested in the program here from the certification program they have, the digital political politics program.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the email, said working in DC, I need to be here.
Cool. I'm glad you're here, and welcome again.
My name is Alan Amelance. Like I said, I work as a public affairs specialist for a federal agency. And I've been working for the agency for 9 years. I worked at our field, 3 different field offices for 7 years. In Europe, the agency I work for, we're in charge of all the American military cemeteries around the world.
Oh, wow.
So we have 25 American military cemeteries.
I was just at 2 this summer.
Where you go?
Was it Bellawood and Normandy?
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, I worked at Normandy for 2 years. I was in charge of visitor seminary. That was my last field job before I moved over to headquarters. And so I've been doing this work for about 1.5 years. And then I'm a veteran, so I had my GI Bill sitting in the door. And so when I had a chance to come out here, I was like, this is great. I'll go to PW, So I'm finishing up my SPR program this year.
That's great.
Just finished my capstone. I created a strategic communications plan for our agency, which we never had before. So it's been an amazing experience. You know, so I've been able to take the experience that I've had with my job and be able to translate that over into my coursework and vice versa. So it's GW's been great. I got to use my GI Bill, like I said, and I haven't paid a dime. The GI Bills cover everything, including drugs and everything else. So I've been very fortunate, I think. And I came here for this tonight because, like I said, I'm interested in the possibility of maybe moving over to the Hill at some point.
That's great.
And I'm starting a graduate certificate this spring back with the I still have some GI Bill.
Still have some to use up, use it all up. That's right. Yeah.
My name's Jonathan Hebben. I'm a DC native.
There's three.
So a rare breed. Legislative assistant at a lobby shop on K Street. Very interested in the legislative affairs program, so very interested in your experiences as graduates, both and as a teacher as well. And prospective students hoping to possibly go in the fall of this spring.
What firm are you at?
Take a bit of relief.
Oh, okay. I've heard.
Yeah, I guess it's a big Philadelphia firm, but we kind of characterize ourselves as a small shop. We actually have this rebranding effort, which is very interesting. We call ourselves an Alpha District Policy Group. So we can wear both hats at various times when it's beneficial for us. And do nonprofit healthcare advocacy.
Cool.
My name is James Reed. I'm originally from Lebanon, Kansas, graduated from small school in Ohio, and I've been in DC for about the last 7.5, 8 years. I work at a small shop that helps small companies up to corporations comply with import and export regulations as administered by Department of State, Department of Commerce, and we also do a little bit of customs work. I'm looking to actually make a shift out of this and to do something that I'm a little more passionate about, which is focusing on economic development, especially at local levels, looking at, for example, the Rust Belt area, how new innovative economic schemes and policy mechanisms are being developed to turn old Rust Belt towns into something new, and trying to, in my particular interest, would be trying to do that by attracting and building up the people and resources that are already there. And my interest is in the program. I'm applying for schools this fall, and I got an email to come here, and I thought this would be a great opportunity. So,
What school in Ohio?
Kenyon.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Good school.
My name is Michael. I'm from New Jersey. I'm not from DC, but I came here a few years ago. Graduated college in 2012. Like the New Jersey thing.
Yeah.
I did. I do actually love the state of New Jersey.
It's not what you think it is. It's actually has a little bit of every part of the country in it. So
I've been to New Jersey wine country, so I really love New Jersey.
it's pretty good. I'll leave it there. I went back to school a second time and graduated in 2012 and came to DC a few years ago for the first time ever, and have never been so enamored with the city and everything you could possibly do in it as I had before. Never felt like such a sense of belonging, and I've been trying to come down here and network and build relationships, and it's been difficult trying to do it from far away, but I've had some success with political experiences in the last few years, working for a state committee, working for a polling firm within the university. I did campaign work, which was not easy. I quit my job to do that. It was not easy whatsoever. But I transitioned out of work in construction. I work for Apple, Apple Corporate Good Company, and I'm trying to have my political work build up steam and to try to aid that. I feel like this program is just really what you need to try to get there. So I'm looking at just make it work wherever we can.
So I'm Dave Waz. I was earlier. I've had a career already. So for about 10 years, I had an IT firm. So we talk about ups and downs and setbacks. Plenty of those along the way. I went to law school, and I guess here I am again, kind of reinventing myself. But I just really love to learn. Really, really love politics. And what I like about this program is this emphasis on the practical. Because I was looking at political science and so forth, which I think would be very interesting, but this is what is so attractive. This is a really fun.
Third career.
Very cool.
That's good. I think people should have lots of long careers.
I'm David Sorensen. I'm originally from Houston, live in the Dallas area now. I did the online program with political management. I got the email. Decided to see what the school looks like. And what else? Well, everything else pretty much said earlier. That was good information I got about the presentation role. What I was saying.
And we'll welcome you. We'll welcome you.
He'd be a good guy if you're going to transition.
Don't do it.
I'm Evan Hill. I am a communications consultant at ICF International. I really focus on climate change and energy efficiency policies. And I just wanted to come out tonight because I've been applying on the back burner for a couple of years now, but I really wanted to be proactive and come out tonight and really gain more insight on how the school can be effective.
My name is Kevin Braden. I'm from Denver, Colorado. I went to school in San Diego. I've been in DC for a year now, and I actually work for the House Clerk's Office on the road. And I'm now looking to make a move to a member of the committee, and just looking for any advice that I can get. So it's all very interesting to hear the different paths that people take and routes and different possibilities that people go through. And I was at CQ college back there a couple weeks ago, so that's how I got about the program. I wanted to hear more about it and see exactly how it could help. So thanks to all of you for taking time to talk to us today.
I'm Caitlin Patrick. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I went to a small school in Pennsylvania and
Where?
Franklin and Marshall.
Oh, right next door. I grew up in York.
Oh, okay. Yep. And I came here after I graduated to intern in the Senate for Senator Casey's position. But now, since the internship ended, I've been working at a think tank in DC, but I'm sort of looking for graduate school options and sort of see what the next step would be where I am, which I love, but there's not a big middle where I am. There's a bottom and a top. So looking at how graduate school might be kind of the next middle step.
Okay, good.
Hi, again, I'm Jessica Smith, and I mentioned I graduated from the Legislative Affairs program in 2011. I'm a native of Washington, D.C. I went to school in, I went to Penn State, and I am currently working for a business improvement district here. And I had a few different experiences along the way, being able to work on different grassroots movements, and I joined this program pretty much right after graduating from undergraduate. So I think I was like close to being one of the younger people in the class, and the reason why I joined the program is because I wanted that understanding of politics and policy, and not so much just political science. So it really gave me an opportunity to learn that aspect of it, and I also was working I got an internship with Senator Scavino on the Finance Committee during the healthcare legislation that had brought me flip-flop as my teacher. So it was a great experience being able to experience both sides of the aisle, as well as learning the, because I consider myself more of a middle ground person. So it was a great experience from that aspect. And my current interest is economic growth and sustainability initiatives in distressed neighborhoods. So doing advocacy in that area is where I'd like to move to. Why am I here? I like to just kind of get back in the mix and hear people's experiences, and because the bid is apolitical, so you don't really have that same type of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not there. So it's just kind of refreshes and connects me back to what I have.
I'm Dakota Elkenstein. I'll be starting in January in the political management program. So that's why I'm here. I live in Maryland, in rural Smith, Columbia. I do IT for an education company out there. And I was on the email also that went out about this. And I'm just here to, I've lived in Maryland for like 6 years, so DC itself is not totally new, but the insider information and the background about how you network and how things work here, that's pretty new. So things like this, making it fun to come to learn about. Thank you all for doing this.
And thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you taking some time. We hope that the information we've provided helps to clarify your own direction in terms of careers and otherwise. We're interested in your success. We're interested in you coming to us to advance your education too, if that's what you have in mind. We're pleased to make ourselves available to you. Jordana can always get me, even when I don't want to be gotten. But I'm happy to talk to anyone, anytime. I mean, and as is all of our career directors. I think what you'll find is that they're very accommodating. They're more than happy to make themselves available to you to talk about your careers and everything else. We also, by the way, have a career director who's very effective, who's worked on Capitol Hill, worked as a consultant, and she's a lawyer besides. So we have sort of just about everything covered there, I think. But she's very effective too, and I think is really helps to point people in the right direction. So again, thank you for coming. I'm sure we'll be hanging around here for a little bit and maybe answer some other questions. But Jordana and Misha and me and maybe some of our panel will join us too, to stay around for a little bit and finish off the food so we don't have to give it away or something anyway. But again, thank you again, panel, Stephanie, Ryan, Alex, thank you.